Good morning, everybody. Folks are still coming in, which is great. Come on in, please join us. So this morning, at least for this panel, we understand that some of you have a class to get to at 10 o'clock. So if you have to leave before 10, just do so quietly, it's okay. And we just thank you all for coming, and I realize that for some of you it's mandatory that you attend one of these panels. For other folks who are getting extra credit. For whatever reason you are here, we certainly hope that these are issues that, part of the reason that you're here is because you actually care about these issues. So I want to talk about the gender wage gap, So, and I don't have it, that's not my technology, that's Dr. Smith's. Okay, so Dr. Schmitt is next, but I'm going to talk about the gender wage gap. So the first question is, what is it? What is the gender wage gap? And I feel very out of my element since there's no blackboard here for me to write on. The gender wage gap is the difference in earnings between men and women. It's pretty simple. You've heard the statistics. You tell me. Women earn blank for every dollar a man earns. Women earn blank. Aaron?
70 cents.
We're doing a little bit better than 70 cents. Generally speaking, I can't. Courtney, hey Courtney, it's been a while.
77 cents.
77 cents, Courtney's right. At least that's the data that we have available to us, is that women on average earn 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. Here's the thing with data. You got to be really careful about what we are talking about and who's collecting it and all those kinds of things. Using that data, which is aggregate data, taking all women across all races, Asian women, white women, African American women, Latino women, and comparing them to all men of all of those races in all categories, we get this aggregate number of women earning 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. Don't despair. When I went to college, and I graduated 25 years ago, that number that I had ingrained in my head that I had learned, you know what that number was when I was in college 25 years ago? 74 cents. So don't ever let them tell you that there hasn't been progress. Has there been progress? Yeah. In 25 years, that number has gone up. Do the higher math for me. 74 cents to 77 cents. Woohoo! Now, that is a piece of data that we'll keep coming back to that we'll talk about. When we're talking about that kind of data, we have to take into consideration a number of things. Region in the country, you might want to know how Pennsylvania ranks compared to other states as far as the gender wage gap. It is not exactly the same in every state. The best region as far as the smallest gender gap. You want to take a guess? Smallest gender gap, smallest difference in earnings by region. Mr. Calvert.
That'd be the Northeast.
Washington, D.C., nation's capital, 91%. Women make 91 cents for every dollar a man earns in Washington, D.C. New York is next, 86. How about Pennsylvania? Are we next? We are 37th. We are 37th out of 51. 76 cents for every dollar. 76 cents for every dollar a man earns. That data is available. I am not going to read you all 51 pieces of information on that, but just to give you a perspective, it's a complex issue. There's lots of things going on, right? We have to think about region and area of the country. We need to think about occupations and jobs as well as gender. I'm going to give you a little riddle. Some of you have heard this. If you know the answer to the riddle, zip it. For those of you who haven't, close your eyes and imagine. Close your eyes and imagine. A father and a son are in a horrible car crash. A father and a son are in a horrible car crash and taken to different hospitals. Father's taken to one hospital, the son is taken to the other hospital. The son is taken into surgery, and the surgeon says, I cannot operate on him. He's my son. How can that be? How can that be? You've heard it before? For those of you who have not heard the riddle before, how can that be? How can that be? Anyone want to take a gander, take a guess? How can it be? The father and the son were taken to two separate hospitals. When the son arrives in the OR, the surgeon says, I cannot operate on him. He's my son. How can that be? Yes. Excellent. The surgeon is his mother. Now, were you all going to say that? What were you going to say? Be honest.
I thought he was gay.
He's got two dads. Two gay dads. What were you going to say, Gabby? Gabby was going with gay. Two gay dads. When I've asked this, I start my gender in the law class, so now you all, with that riddle, and I get two gay dads. I get, he's got two fathers because one's his biological father and one's his stepfather. And another, no. He's got a biological father, a stepfather, and an adopted father. He's got a team of fathers, right? That's the only way that it makes sense. He's got a whole soccer team of dads. Because we would rather, why do we have a soccer team of dads? As opposed to saying the surgeon is his mom. Why do we get caught up in all of these different incantations about a soccer team full of dads? Why do we do that? Catherine's point, we assume that all surgeons are male. Do we have that? Whether we like it or not, did we grow up with this idea that certain jobs are for certain kinds of people? And not just by their education, not just by their skills or their experiences, but it's part of our socialization, not only in the US, but even more globally, that people, certain kinds of people, fill certain types of jobs. And what happens with that is that employers feel that way, workers feel that way, children feel that way, teachers feel that way, parents feel that way. I could go on. But this is what we're taught. So occupations have gender too. Really important point. People have gender, we engage in gender, we do gender, but occupations have gender. So I say surgeon, what's it gendered? Ma'am. Nurse. Right, so if you watch Ben Stiller's character in all of the Meet the Fockers movies, right? Meet the Parents? Oh, I'm too old. Okay. You know a position, an occupation is gendered when you hear stuff like male nurse, right? Because the assumption is to be a nurse you are female, and so if you are a male nurse, you're an exception, and we're going to talk about that. How about elementary school teacher? Police officer. See, I hesitated. I didn't even say policeman. I said police officer, and you still said man. Occupations have gender. Jobs have gender. Entire institutions have gender. Military? I heard, just coming in today, on my hour and 10-minute commute on the way in. A story on NPR about a gentleman he and his wife both in the Army. They were both bomb specialists. He said, our jobs were to rip bombs apart with our bare hands. They both did that job. She died in the line of duty. He continually gets letters from his employer, from the government, that say, "Dear Mrs. Foltz, we are sorry for the loss of your husband." Is that done purposefully? Are they trying to make him feel like he's invisible, like his wife didn't matter? No, it's not done to make him feel badly, but what's the assumption? Women are the widows of military men. And yet, of course, we know, and I know personally because I have women students who are in the military. Of course women are in the military. But the military is still an organization, as an entire organization, that is gendered masculine. Meaning that it's historically been dominated by men, meaning that the ways in which they talk about the organization and the jobs within the organization are masculine. So, occupational, I don't need a microphone with my big loud voice. Occupational sex segregation, the idea that occupations have gender and are dominated more by some folks than others. I looked up the most recent data we have on what jobs are most frequently dominated by women. Which jobs are most frequently dominated by women? If you're thinking about it, I had the top 20, but I'll give you you tell me. And we're trying to understand the wage gap, right? We're trying to understand why it is that on average women are paid 77 cents per dollar. One of the answers is, well, women do different work than men. That's why there's that difference in pay. Women do different work. That's part of the answer. It's a piece of it. It's not the whole pie, but it's a piece of the pie. So women do different work than men. And here's a side note. Whenever women dominate an occupation, what happens to the pay? It goes down. Which means in general that women's work, when it's considered women's work, it's devalued. It's devalued because we don't pay as well as work that's considered quote-unquote man's work. So what occupations are dominated by women? Sarah?
Housekeeping.
Housekeeping is 9th. Brian?
Secretary?
1st is administrative assistant or clerical. Courtney?
A nurse.
Nursing is 2nd. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Ginger, child care.
Ginger. Child care is 11th. Yes, ma'am.
Lunch ladies.
Lunch ladies. Wait staff. Wait staff is 8th. So wait staff in general, servers at school cafeterias or in restaurants. Wait staff is, what did I just say? You're paying attention. That's awesome. Teachers. Elementary and middle school teachers. 3rd. That's the 3rd, right? 1st is admin, 2nd is nursing, 3rd is elementary and middle school teachers. You've seen this in your own experiences, right? If a guy wants to be an elementary school teacher, a guy wants to be an elementary school teacher, what kind of things are said about him? That he's a pedophile, that he's a creep. Help me out. Yes.
He's too feminine.
He's too feminine. So we worry about him. We worry about that he wants to be a, and all of these things, of course, are myths. Who's most likely to be a pedophile? Not elementary school teachers, by the way. Right? So again, we're gendering occupations. So if he steps out of his gendered position and wants to be an elementary school teacher, we socially sanction him, we criticize him, and we push him back or out. If he wants to be a nurse, are we accepting of that? Cool with that? I mean, as a society, people question and wonder, well, why don't you want to be a doctor? Women are most found in admin, then nursing, middle and elementary school teachers, then cashiers, then nursing, psychiatric and home health aides, then retail, then supervisors of retail, wait staff, maids and housekeeping, customer service representatives, and child care workers. So why this wage gap? Well, women do different work. They are found in different occupations, and those occupations tend to be paid less than the occupations that men are in. How about when men and women are in the same jobs? What's another, here's the thing. So a piece of that gendered wage gap is explained by the fact that men and women are in different jobs. So if they're in the same jobs, do they get paid the same? No. You are right. So what's that all about? They're in the same job, same level of education, same work experience, and they're still not getting paid the same. What's the answer there? Why is that the case? What's going on there? Why do women in the biological sciences get paid 75% of what men in the biological sciences are paid? Why do women in math and other sciences get paid 76? How come women in the health professions get paid 76 cents for the dollar that men make? In the same profession, in the same job, in the same field, with the same level of education, still get paid differently. Now what's the answer? Asia.
Could it be because of family values? Because the woman has to be able to take care of her husband, maternity leave, or the family. Someone has to stay home.
As if I planted Asia there with exactly that question. Even when women don't have kids. Even when women do not have kids, if you compare men and women without children, 10-year average weekly earnings 10 years after graduation. Please graduate, folks. This is not trying to dissuade you from graduating, but 10 years after graduating for full-time workers with bachelor's degrees. 10 years after graduation, full-time workers with bachelor's degrees. Let's compare men and women without children. Without children. Now, they should then get paid the same, right, Asia? Well, you know that they don't. Women get paid 63 cents. What? It just got worse, not better? When you compare men and women without children, women still earn less, and even less than that average that we had talked about at the top of the conversation. So it's not the mommy track stuff. It's not the lack of paid maternity leave, because on the planet, there are 3 countries that do not have paid maternity leave. Yes? And we're one of them. Papua New Guinea. Oh, and where's my Papua New Guinea and
Lesotho.
Lesotho. Thank you, Dr. Smith. The International Labor Organization recommends a minimum of 14 weeks paid leave for women who have just given birth. Canada gives 50 weeks. The US gives 0. Mexico gives 12. The US gives 0. Go by continent. Africa, on average, within all the countries of Africa, 11.5 weeks. Asia, 22.9 weeks. Middle East, 26 weeks. Western Europe, 40.5 weeks of paid maternity leave. Eastern Europe, 99 weeks. So, but even when we control for children, women still get paid less. So now what's it about? Help me with your name again. David. Men have an easier time moving up. That's probably true, more so in some occupations than others. But even in the same job, what's going on? Heather.
We see it as normal, so we don't ask for raises, we don't ask for promotions. We're afraid to be seen as bitchy if we're too normal, so we're quiet.
Some of it has to do with individuals, but as a sociologist, I'm going to argue that in addition to what Heather's talking about, because it is true, women are not great negotiators on par. Some of us have learned to be better, right? But women are unfortunately socialized in a way that is not conducive to certain kinds of jobs and certain kinds of behaviors within those jobs, like negotiating for a better salary. That's a learned behavior. We're more likely to teach boys that than girls. But overall, over the individual, think larger. This will be my last point because Dr. Smith is next. What's the missing link?
There's always a chance that women can get pregnant. Because they're
This is
a
so
woman.
beautiful.
That's it.
Beautiful.
That's all it is. You can get pregnant, and that's all it is.
It's discrimination. It's discrimination, period. Bottom line. Whether women, this is kind of a good segue to Dr. Smith, whether women want to have children, choose to have children, choose not to have children, can have children, cannot have children, reproduce or not reproduce, they are often seen in the workforce. I'll leave you with this image. As a walking uterus? How's that image? And she gets paid less.
Beautiful, beautiful segue. Thank you.
There you are.
How are you all? Good morning. I had this beautiful idea for this big arc in talking about women's reproductive health in the workplace. Then I started pulling my notes together and realized we would be here for 3 hours. So what I'm going to focus on today is a Supreme Court decision, commonly called the Hobby Lobby decision. How many of you have heard about this decision? What did this decision decide? Give me a one-sentence Twitter post.
It dealt with the constitutionality of Obamacare and birth control.
Okay, so who provides birth control? What are we asking?
It's requiring employers to cover birth control in their insurance policies.
Very good, okay. By the way, it's not just the Hobby Lobby decision. Conestoga Woods is the other company involved. Hobby Lobby tends to get all the attention if you go on your Facebook feed. But Conestoga Woods, which is a Lancaster County company, is also part of the plaintiff here. So you kind of want to think about that. Let me take a step back a little bit. Okay, this was really a nice segue. In the beginning, there was sex. Okay, we are our biological destinies. For a very long time, that was what we presumed. men and women were presumed to be able to do certain things, right, what Dr. Schmitt talked about, to be fit for certain tasks because of our biological makeup. I love this ad. This is for Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound tablet form, because women have hysteria that they have no control over. This is a real product, I kid you not. Right? Crying, sobbing, laughing, she has no control of herself. The slightest thing drives her to distraction, all tired all the time, overwrought, nerves strung to the breaking point. If only she would give this vegetable compound and it would give her a chance to help her, how well and happy she might be. Sign me up, right? I asked my husband yesterday, should we get some of these? He said, yeah, we probably should. So, how many of you know, for instance, the condition of hysteria was historically thought to happen because a woman's uterus had wandered away from her? And I'm not making this up. Walking away from her uterus, she is therefore has lost her mind. She is now hysterical. I always have this vision of little uteri wandering the earth. For a long time, women were not allowed to become doctors. It was too much for their brains. Their little pea brain couldn't handle it, right? And not to mention, they get a visitor once a month that would render them completely incompetent for at least a week out of a month, right? So there was all this idea about sex being biological destiny. Then we discovered gender, right? We discovered gender roles. We began to understand gender is a social construction. You can be whatever you want to be. Rosita Riveter, right? We can do it. Women can work in industry. Women can do heavy work, okay? All of a sudden, it became gender is no longer a restriction. I am a child of the late 80s and early 90s. For those of you who remember and are not shilling products, all the Nike ads where the tagline was just do it, right? Anybody can do this. You don't have to be Michael Jordan. Anybody can do this. There are no restrictions. So as a sociologist, I've noticed something really interesting over the years. When I went to college, I graduated 18 years ago, we used the word sex in papers all the time. And I'm now teaching a whole generation of college students who no longer use the word sex, who use the word gender. And as much as I try to explain to the students, you're actually using the word gender wrongly. Gender actually refers to the social constructions and the social norms that society has attached. What you're really talking about is sex-based differences. When we talk about the gender wage gap, folks, we really should be talking about the sex-based wage gap because we're looking at biological differences, right? So here is a plea that I'm going to make because this is kind of unusual for a sociologist. We need to bring sex back into the discussion for the very simple reason that Dr. Bacci and Dr. Schmitt just mentioned, which is that while biology is complex, people now fall along a continuum of physical, chromosomal, and genetic spectrum. We know that. We know that sex is complicated, but the reality is this, okay? Not every woman can get pregnant and give birth. I made you a whole slide. This is like one of those logic classes. Remember philosophy? Right? If A equals B. Not every woman can get pregnant and give birth. Not every woman wants to get pregnant and give birth. But, everybody read that last sentence. Only women can get pregnant and give birth. And hence, here is the nub, okay, of this issue. All right. Now, here's an important thing to remember. We're here to talk about gender inequality in the workplace. It's never just about gender. It is intersectional. It's about race. It's about where you live. It's about a whole bunch of other things that interact with gender. And in this case, it's also about religion. Okay? One of the things that we don't really like to talk about, we don't really like to pull this apart, but here are two things you need to know before we get to Hobby Lobby. And this is complicated. For those of you who take my classes, you know I'm not a PowerPoint person. But this is complicated enough that it actually requires a PowerPoint to explain it. Okay? Back in 1993, something called RFRA passed. Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. Congress passed this in 1993. Let me be very clear that this was supported by both major parties in Congress. This was not at all controversial. This was not partisan. Why did Congress pass RFRA? Well, a Supreme Court decision came down that said that a Native American man who smoked peyote as part of a religious ritual could not claim religious protection and exemption, and he was liable. He could not claim religious beliefs. Congress, on the heels of the Supreme Court decision, said, this is not good, so they passed the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. Let me be very clear. This act was passed to protect religious minorities. Individual, okay? People, individual people. This becomes very crucial in Hobby Lobby. And there's 3 prongs to the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. 1, government shall not substantially burden a person's exercise of religion. Okay, the government cannot put a burden on your right to practice religion unless, and there's parts B, 1 and 2, unless it is in the interest of a compelling government interest, and it is the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. There's the 2-prong exception. Okay, so we clear on what RFRA says right now? Okay, so you as an individual have protection under the law, okay, to practice your religious beliefs unless, 1, the government has a compelling interest and the government can find a non-restrictive way to do that. By the way, thank you for coming because I'm a total nerd. I love talking about Supreme Court decisions and I never get to talk about this in class, so I'm very excited. I have a captive audience, so, okay. Then, in 2012, you mentioned Obamacare. I like to call it the Affordable Care Act. It's a matter of names, right, what we call it at. Beginning August 1, 2012, a particular, by the way, the Affordable Care Act is huge. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages. There are many different components. When we think Obamacare, people just go, oh, it's Obamacare. It's actually huge, and there are still parts of it that are still being phased in, okay? But beginning August 1, 2012, all employers are now required to provide preventative services to all their employees as part of the Affordable Care Act. What do we mean by preventative services? We didn't just sit there and come up with a list. What the administration did was the Department of Health and Human Services asked the Institute of Medicine to compile a list. What are a list of services that women would need for their preventative health needs? So the Institute of Medicine came up with this list: well woman visits, screenings for gestational diabetes, counseling for sexually transmitted diseases, counseling and screening for HIV/AIDS, most of which are not controversial, except for one. The Institute of Medicine also recommended that the United States, all FDA-approved contraceptive methods be covered. Okay, here's the list. There are 20 of them. There are 20 FDA-approved contraceptive methods. And under the Affordable Care Act, employers now have to cover all of these should an employee choose that option. Okay? We clear? We now have Affordable Care Act. We have RFRA, the Religious Act, and this. And in 2012, they met. Because what happened was that Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods, both for-profit corporations, keep that in mind, they want to make money, they sell stuff to make money, okay, said, we provide health care coverage to our employees and we refuse to pay for contraception for our employees because it violates our religious beliefs. This is what you all hear in the media, yes? The truth is a little more complicated. There are 20 methods. There are barrier methods, hormonal methods, Permanent methods, you will see that vasectomy is there, it is covered. Here is where the issue is. Okay? There is emergency contraception and implanted devices, IUDs. What Hobby Lobby objects to is not all 20 forms of contraceptives. What Hobby Lobby objects to are the 4 that are in bold. Why did Hobby Lobby object to the 4 that are in bold? Because they say they believe that those 4 contraceptives cause abortion. Okay? The emergency contraceptions, the variations of Plan B, Ella, the copper IUD, and the Miranda IUD. They believe that those 4 are not really contraceptives. They believe those 4 cause abortion. Okay? We clear on that? So we went to court. And the Supreme Court makes a decision. It's a little blurry, I couldn't get it sized quite right. I love it when people go, this was the court decided. Most Supreme Court decisions are actually different shades of gray, you know, that word had to come in at some point. When people go, the court decides, it really usually is not a unanimous decision. And that's something really important to remember. This is a 5-4 decision, okay? The 5 people from the right over agreed with Hobby Lobby and Constable Wood. The 4 from the left over said, no, we do not agree. And I will point this out, since this has been mentioned and discussed a great deal when this decision came down. You will notice that all 5 who agreed with Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods are men. Breyer is the 1 male who dissented, and the 3 women dissented, okay? I will also point this out, because it's not just about gender. All 5 men who were in the majority are also Catholic. This becomes quite crucial. Of the 4 who dissented, all of them are Jewish, except for Sotomayor, who is Catholic. This is an interesting sort of cultural war, religion playing out here, by the way. If you've been doing the math, you will notice that there is not a Protestant Christian on the Supreme Court. They're all either Catholics or Jews, okay? I'm going to quote Dahlia Lithwick, who is the Supreme Court reporter for Slate, who is wonderful at breaking this stuff down. It's kind of hard not to read into the gender and religious makeup of who went where, because this is actually so crucial. So this is where the fun part begins. There are actually 4 pieces to this decision. I'm a nerd. I totally love this stuff. Right? There's 1 majority opinion. Samuel Alito wrote that. There was 1 concurrence written by Justice Kennedy. There was 1 dissenting opinion, let me be unbiased and say written by my hero, Justice Ginsburg. And there were 2 justices who did not agree with 1 part of the dissenting opinion, and those were Justices Breyer and Kagan. Okay? What does this all mean? So let's look at the logic, because Hobby Lobby and Conestoga would say, under RFRA, under the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, we do not have to do this. So remember all the pieces of RFRA, right? First of all, RFRA applies only to individuals. Remember, I emphasized that? We are here to protect individual religious rights. But Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods are for-profit corporations. Can they bring suit under RFRA? Alito says, yes, they can. Some of you may have heard of an earlier decision called Citizens United, where essentially 5 justices decided that yes, for the purposes of law, corporations are people. They have free speech rights, okay? So they said, absolutely, Alito says you can do this, a corporation counts as an individual. So RFRA applies to you. Kennedy concurs, okay? Ginsburg says, of course not, because she's Justice Ginsburg, right? Remember the 2 justices who dissented from the dissent? Breyer and Kagan? they chose not to agree with that part of Ginsburg decision. They said, we are not going to discuss whether corporations or people will save that for a different day. Okay? That's why this is also complicated. So step one's done. Yes, you can bring suit under RFRA. You are considered a person. Okay? Second part, does the government have a compelling interest in imposing this burden? This is where it gets interesting. Alito says yes. Government has a compelling interest, but he's kind of dismissive about it. The actual words he uses in the decision, I travel with Supreme Court decisions, I have the decisions there. He says, let's just assume that the government has a compelling interest. Let's just assume, okay? He never gets into it. Kennedy, in his concurrence, is more serious, and he actually does say, yes, the government has a compelling interest. Yes, access to contraception is important to women's health. Kennedy at least says that. Alito just says, let's just assume there's a compelling interest, right? Ginsburg in her dissent clearly says this is an important issue, women's access to contraception, okay? So yes, part one's done. The government does have a compelling interest. Does this place a substantial burden on a person's exercise of religion? Okay? Most of you may not have known this, but the defendant here is the administration, is the Obama administration, is Department of Health and Human Services. Obama's response, the administration's response had been, this is really simple. You guys don't have to provide health care to your employees. At which point, Justice Alito says, no. They provide health care for their employees because their religious beliefs also drives them to say, we need to provide this for our employees. It gets very complicated, right? They need to provide health care, okay? Now, exercise of religion. Remember, Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods are contesting that these contraceptives cause abortion. That's the nub of the religious belief. A lot of people have said, well, they still pay for Viagra and vasectomies. It is completely consistent because those do not cause abortions. Okay, so when you see a lot of things on Twitter and Facebook where people going, well, they still pay for men, it's completely consistent with the religious belief. Okay, I think that's kind of an unfair shot. Here is where this becomes interesting. Justice Alito in the decision says, as long as you have a sincerely held religious belief, we will accept that. Science shows over and over and over again that those 4 contraceptives do not cause abortion. The court has just said it doesn't matter. The science doesn't matter. As long as you believe that this is what it causes, we will accept that. You see how dangerous this becomes, right? The science is gone. Sincerely held religious belief, we'll accept it. And in fact, my student Ginger Hanley, who did her thesis on looking at media discussion of this whole situation, has found that media sources are already using the word abortifacients to describe these contraceptives, even though there is no scientific backing whatsoever that this actually causes abortion. So we already have a whole bunch of people thinking, oh yeah, of course they cause abortions. They don't, okay? I think the science is pretty rigorous on that. So one last part to go, okay? This is where I want to say, this is Alito's decision. It says, we do not question their sincerity. I want you to see that phrase really clearly. You can now argue you have a sincerely held religious belief. The science doesn't matter. You don't have to prove, okay, any of it, right? Here's the last part. Is this the least restrictive way? Alito says, no. There are 2 more or less restrictive ways to provide women with contraception. 1, the government can set up a system and pay for these women. Given the attitudes a lot of us in this country we have about government taking over our lives, you can kind of see how well that's going to go, right? Second, the court says, actually, we already have another method. Remember that Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods are for-profit corporations. What about if you are non-profit? Okay, Little Sisters of the Poor, Notre Dame University, okay? These are non-profit corporations. And the Obama administration said, okay, if you are a non-profit religious-based organization, all you have to do is sign a form to tell us that, and we will take care of providing contraceptive access for your female employees. And what the court essentially said, if you look at that writing, is HHS, Health and Human Services, has already established an accommodation for nonprofit organizations with religious objections. And what the court is saying is, look, why don't you just extend to for-profit companies what you already allow nonprofit companies to do? Hobby Lobby can just sign a form. There is a way out, okay, of this, okay? So you begin to see how complicated, right, this becomes. And you know I had to put that in there because I love Justice Ginsburg, right? There's somebody who, you know what this is a pun off, yes. There are t-shirts, you can buy the t-shirts. It is rumored that the person who created this has actually met Justice Ginsburg and she loves the shirt. She has worn it, she has posed for photos with the person who created the shirt, right? Now, having said that, the decision says this is a one-time deal. You cannot show up and claim religious beliefs in any other areas and expect us to give you a free pass, okay? I want to be very clear. This is what the decision and the concurrence said. And now we come to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her dissent, which you should read, it is an amazing dissent, basically says, you guys are nuts. Or in Dahlia Lithwig's words, you guys are bananas. Because how could this possibly be a one-time only decision, right? And what she says is, this is a decision of startling breadth, okay? The court holds that commercial enterprises, including corporations, along with partnerships and sole proprietorships, can opt out of any law they judged incompatible with their sincerely held religious beliefs. She says, what you guys have just done is open a Pandora's box. Now, any company can say, I have a sincerely held religious belief, I do not wish to do X. And if you look at that last line, this is what's interesting. There will always be, whenever, in lieu of tolling an enterprise claiming a religious-based exemption, the government, the general public can pick up the tab. Any company can now say, she claims, I have this religious held belief, I do not wish to pay for X. Therefore, the government and the public can pay for it. It's essentially what this comes down to, right? Even more important, Justice Ginsburg argues, what you all just allowed is that you allow corporations and people to impose their own religious beliefs on someone else who does not share the same religious beliefs, because let's all face it, not everybody who works for Hobby Lobby is an evangelical Christian, and not everybody who works for Conestoga Woods is Mennonite.
True.
And so what Ginsburg said is, under the First Amendment, we are very clear that what this would happen is you would deny legions of women who do not hold their employers' beliefs access to contraceptive coverage. Now I can say to you, I have a particular religious belief, therefore I'm going to impose it on you, okay, is what's going to happen, right? And she provides some examples here, and this is where women and work and inequality in the workplace comes back, and I think this is worth reading. I'm really sorry, I'm trying to rush through this, right? What happens, look at the 5th line down, what happens when an owner of a restaurant chain refuses to serve black patrons based on their religious beliefs opposing racial integration? What happens when a born-again Christians who hold closely held health clubs believe that the Bible prescribes hiring or retaining an individual living with but not married to a person of the opposite sex? What happens if somebody refuses to hire a young single woman working without her father's consent? What happens when a corporation says, I'm not going to hire a married woman working without her husband's consent? This is what the door has just been opened to, okay? What happens when you have employers with religious grounded objections to the use of certain contraceptives What if you have Jehovah's Witnesses who say, I'm not going to pay for a blood transfusion? What happens when you have Scientologists who say, I refuse to pay for antidepressants? What happens when you have Muslims, Jews, and Hindus saying we're not going to pay for medications derived from pigs? And what happens when you have Christian Scientists, among others, who says we're not going to pay for vaccination? You all see how this kind of, steamroll, right? So what does this all mean? Okay, this means a few things. One, remember that alternative accommodation? You can sign a form and pass it. It is not clear that Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Woods are okay with that. And by the way, the Little Sisters of the Poor and Notre Dame and a whole bunch of other nonprofit organizations are challenging that accommodation. That's making its way through the courts. So stay tuned, okay? That may not work. Remember also that Hobby Lobby challenged 4 out of 20 contraceptives. What this decision, however, decided is whatever your religious beliefs are, you can deny all 20, not just those 4. All you have to do, again, is say, I have a sincerely held religious belief, and nobody can challenge that, okay? What happens to civil rights and discrimination as a result of sincerely held religious beliefs? In the decision and the concurrence, they were very clear that they will not accept racial discrimination, but a lot of people have pointed out they did not mention gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. That's a problem. Okay. What happens to inequality and access to contraceptives for women? An IUD could cost upwards of $1,000. What types of women can afford to pay for that on their own and not have an employer cover that? Okay, that's something to think about. And really, ultimately, why are we treating contraceptive as something that an employer has a right to deny women? And as a sociologist, this really comes back to an issue of why is health insurance tied to employment and not a public right? And this is a little side note, and I will end here, and this is something for you to think about. It has been discovered that until 2012, Hobby Lobby did provide coverage for those 4 contraceptives that they said they wouldn't cover. What happened in 2012? Well, Obamacare kicked into place. And many people have questioned whether this was a politically motivated lawsuit against the Affordable Care Act and not about contraceptive care. When asked, Hobby Lobby's response is, oops, we had no idea that we were providing. That's the actual, it was an oversight. We did not know. Huh?
They also invest in it as
And we're
part
going to
of
go
their
there.
retirement.
They also invest in the funds and stocks of the companies that produce these quote-unquote abortifacients. And they say that's a different issue. We're not directly supporting abortion. Okay? So the issue then becomes, what is this really about? Why was this suit filed? Was this really about the Affordable Care Act? Or is this really about religious health beliefs? But I want you to see how complicated this decision is. I spent a lot of my July sitting in my office reading decisions and getting into conference calls. This is very dangerous in terms of what the door potentially now opens. Okay, you can't try this with any of us, but you can now say, I have a sincerely held religious belief and claim something. Don't try this with us. I have a sincerely held religious belief that I should not complete this paper. That is not going to work with us, but it does raise complex issues, and I hope you can kind of see where that complexity, okay? Now here's a little plug for those of you who like talking about issues like that. I'm teaching religion and society this spring.
My college days are over, thank goodness. But I would like to take your class in the spring. I would like that. I have, my name is Angela Trout. I'm with the YWCA Lancaster. I just like to springboard, how lucky am I to be on this panel? This is just an amazing panel. I'm so happy that you came to this discussion. I will springboard on what Dr. Smith said about the Conestoga Wood Specialties Corporation. I have some intimate knowledge with that. My husband works for that tell you that the women and men who work there are not affluent. They're working class people. They can't afford to go out and buy these things on their own. And generally, they are burdened with, having many children. Now, a lot of people, and we had discussed before the panel discussion, why has the discussion been all about Hobby Lobby and sort of Conestoga Wood Specialty sort of has gotten a pass on this? We believe that it's because it's a Mennonite-owned company. It is a Mennonite-owned company. I don't know if people just have this it's a myth that means that only Mennonite people work there, and therefore they're not going to use this anyway, so that's okay. That's not true. That's not true at all. I don't have percentages, but I can tell you from experience, a large majority of the employees there are not Mennonite. So that's where I'll go there. So is anybody, how are you feeling? Let's take a pulse of the room. After these two wonderful speakers, how are you feeling?
About these issues.
About these issues. Are you, yes, not about being here, but about these issues. Who's angry? Can you raise your hand? Who feels really frustrated? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Who feels powerless? Awesome, awesome. Because you do have power. You have power in your voice. You can make change happen. You just need to be actively involved. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it is imperative, especially as young people going into the workforce. As you can see, pay really hasn't changed over the years, and when you adjust it for inflation, it really hasn't moved at all. So you need to be active. You need to be active, and I'm here to talk about advocacy. And there's been, I don't know if it's people just assume that there are laws in place to protect women. There are. So back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, I believe it was 1963, the Equal Pay Act was enacted. So we have the Equal Pay Act, which said that you cannot pay men and women differently. They have to be paid equally. But there was sort of, I don't want to say an out, but an affirmative defense to that for employers would be other than sex. So if you're paying a man and a woman differently, it must be for something that's other than sex. So it could be anything from, did the male, he came in and negotiated better. He just was a better negotiator. The man made more money in his previous job and came to this job, and we had to pay him a little more for him to come here. Generally, women are coming from lower paid positions. It just perpetuates itself. When you fill out an application, it's going to ask you, generally it's going to ask you, what are you making now? You put it in there, and they're going to base your current salary on what you were making. So if a man's already making more money, he's going to continue to make more money. And if you're sort of down here, you may take a bump, but it isn't going to be significantly more. It might, and it might not. But, so what has happened is that court case upon court case, women have found themselves to be on the short end of the stick. And that's how these pay disparities have perpetuated themselves. So with there is a Equal Pay Act. Sorry about that. As you can tell, I'm not a skilled speaker like our doctors here. I don't get a chance to talk in front of large groups of people all that often. But what I do with my job is I actually talk to a lot of legislators. And what I do want to do is just share a quick story before I go into the boring legal stuff. But So last April, I went to Harrisburg and I was advocating on a House bill. There's a House bill and there's a Senate bill that seek to remedy. So that's sort of where I'm going here. So that seek to remedy the Equal Pay Act, sort of to put in bona fide factors. So to sort of take these affirmative defenses that these corporations have been successful in court cases to perpetuate this inequality in pay, they want to make it, they want to take that out and they want bona fide factors. So anyway, I'll get back to that. So I go and I meet a legislator, a woman in, she's a representative, and I think, even though she's Republican, I think, okay, we're gonna bond. We're gonna have this really great rapport. And she's gonna totally understand because she's a single mom, actually, she's a widow. Hopefully, I don't know if anybody, if I'm gonna start to give away who this person is. She's a local legislator. And so I give my spiel about why we need bona fide why we need to we need employers to have bona fide factors for paying men and women differently. And she looked at me after I go through this whole spiel and she goes, you know, women need to stop whining and put on their big girl pants and just suck it up. Swear to God. I swear to God she said this. And I was, my mouth dropped open, and my fellow advocate at the YW is a male. And we just were like, huh? And she goes, look, I worked in sales, and I can tell you I made more money than my male counterparts. Yeah, because she worked on commission. She worked her butt off. There's no question about that. And she made more money. But not all professions work on commission. So it's one of those narrow worldviews that when you're working in advocacy, you sort of encounter all the time, where, especially with one party maybe over the other, where it becomes this very narrow worldview. And if it didn't happen to them, it doesn't happen. So, so the YWCA, USA, YWCA Lancaster, we advocate on behalf of the Paycheck Fairness Act. So the Paycheck Fairness Act, on a national level, which in September it was voted on and it failed in the Senate. We have two bills in the Pennsylvania, we have a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate. The Senate bill is Senate Bill 1212. In the House, it is House Bill 1890. They both seek to remedy these sort of other than sex defenses. So sort of what the out is for employers is the seniority system. So a bona fide factor would have to be, it cannot be based on sex. So they would have to, it would have to be based on a seniority system. So if somebody is in a leadership role, you're the president of the company, of course you make more than the vice president. A merit system, so sort of like the sales. So if you earn a higher, you sell more, then you should make more if you're being paid that way. A system which measures earnings by quantity or quality of production, and differential based on other bona fide factors other than sex, such as education, training, or experience. So the bona fide factor defense described under this shall apply only if the employer demonstrates that such factor is not based upon or derived from a sex-based differential in compensation, is job-related with respect to the position in question, and is consistent with business necessity. Such defense shall not apply where the employee demonstrates that an alternative employment practice exists that would serve the same business purpose without producing such differential that the employer has refused to adopt the alternative practice. So it may be a bleak day for us after this week's elections. We now have a majority House and Senate and Congress. In Lancaster County, I think we have one lone Democrat that represents Lancaster City, Representative Sterla in the House. Republicans had a very good night on Tuesday. The bright side is we have a Democrat who I think will be an ally in this fight for us in Governor-elect Wolf. So what this means, and going back to the beginning, is we need to make our voices heard. There hasn't been a lot of support for these two bills in the state. These were introduced in January, and if I wasn't in this business of advocating on behalf of women, I wouldn't know about them. And I was looking at something online when I was just doing a little research, and there was a petition on change.org for this. 50 people signed the petition. 50 people. Because I think, and people just think that there are laws in place to protect. There are laws in place to protect, but employers usually win the day in court. So that weakens the laws. It dilutes it, weakens them. So you need to be your own voice. And follow these issues. Talk to your local representatives. What I did get from the representative, the female representative who told me that I'm just to put my big girl pants on and suck it up, is if I heard more from my constituents about this, then it becomes something that I will fight for. The fact is that the people she represents in a rural farming area do not. They're on the side of the business. They want to see whatever benefits the business over individuals. So, but if you talk to her, if you tell her and all your representatives, I do not agree with this and I want you to support this. You come in with a big group of people, use your social media outlets. Use your social media. I will write stuff on my personal social media some days, and people are like, I had no idea. That's right, because we don't talk about it. There isn't a real voice out there right now to talk about these issues, especially on a local level. So you need to be your own voice. You see something, you see injustice, you need to speak about it. Just tell people. Did you know that women earn 77 cents to the dollar? Let people come back and say, well, that's because women choose. No, as they said here, even when all factors are leveraged, there's still pay inequality. There is discrimination. And so in closing, I'm just going to say, please be active, please follow, pay attention, and let your local representatives know how you feel about these things. Thank you.